Oh, yeah. It's good stuff, Abby. Thanks. Sun is up, drinks are hot, and now it's time for our first cup. Today, in service of others. So, have you ever been in a riot? I was. It changed my life. Uh, it's amazing what happens when you spend a few hours dodging rubber bullets and wooden dowels, trying to not get singed by burning cars or cut on broken glass in the street, when you're trying to not breathe in tear gas. You're trying to navigate around groups of rioters and police. Uh, it still seems surreal when I talk about it. But potentially the most important part of that night, at least for today's purposes, was that despite everything going on, I saw conversations happening between groups of people. Not like people talking to each other, but groups of rioters, groups of police, groups of people who are neither of those things in communication with each other, an ebb and a flow between groups where the individuals in those groups didn't even seem to know that there was a conversation happening, but were having one nonetheless. That night showed me something that I had never seen at that scale before. I'd seen fights, I'd seen things get a little bit crazy, whatever, but seeing it with, you know, tens of people happening all around me, that was unique. In fact, it set me on a path to getting into behavioral science. Like after I saw those conversations, I needed to know how they were being had, right? And when I did go back to school, I got sucked in even further by learning about two people, two intellectual heroes of mine, Kurt Lewin and Stanley Milgram. Lewin was kind of the grandfather of modern social psychology and sociology. But what really endeared him to me was this idea that he had about the need for theoretical kind of scientific in the lab research, but also scientific in the real world research. He said that these two things worked best when they worked with each other, to not put lab science above applied science and vice versa. Each of them generated unique insights, and that these insights could reinforce the other. It's the stuff that was echoed by Bob Cialdini later on as well. Milgram. I got two things from Milgram. You might have heard of him before. If you haven't heard of him, you might have heard of the obedience to authority experiments or the shock experiments, done by a guy named Stanley Milgram. Milgram found his way into my heart because he wanted to ask big questions, right? A lot of other people in his era wanted to ask big questions as well. A lot of people were focused on trying to understand everything that had happened during World War II. But Milgram did it better than most people. He did it with more attention, with more ambition, with more production, with more care in a lot of ways. And he did it because he wanted to communicate it to a broader audience, to people, right? All of these things, the spectacle, the production, all that stuff, asking a big question in a way that the insights could be shared beyond the academy. I still have a great deal of respect for these values today. But when I got to graduate school, I found out that not everyone agreed with me. It turns out not everybody had been in a riot, right? Or not everyone had relatives or family or friends or whatever that they had lost in a war. A lot of the people that I was around, whether they were students in my cohort or tenured professors or what have you, they were from much more comfortable lives. And I think that had a lot to do with how they saw what science could be. When I asked about, doing work in the real world, the application half, Lewin's other half, the answer was always, "Oh, well, that's too messy. That won't get you published. It's too expensive. It's not worth your time. Yeah, don't worry about that. Just stick to the lab." When I asked about ambition, asking big questions like Milgram did, no, 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 no. You don't want to do that. Don't look up. Look down. In fact, like just niche down. You gotta find a niche, and you just gotta kind of plow into it, and that's just where you have to be. That's just what you should do. Just dive in, get a niche. That one was particularly heartbreaking because it seemed to me that a lot of people with all of this privilege of time and money and education were a lot more interested in becoming valuable because they were scarce, because they're so niche down, instead of becoming valuable because they had something to share with the world that could be used by a lot of people. And then there was communicating it, these findings, these insights, doing them in a way that the public would find useful. And that, most frustratingly of all, that was the thing that seemed to get the most pushback. Here I was at a public university, and public university educated and public school educated, right? Like I'd come up through a system where my salary, my housing, a lot of things were provided for not just by other people's tuition dollars, but by taxpayer money. And when I said I want there to be some sort of a value to those people, everyone just kind of looked at me like I was crazy. Not everyone, but you get the point. And to be honest, I don't know that that much has changed in that system today. But I am still more optimistic now than I ever have been before because of a couple of very simple things. First off, because of the way that the academy has been running itself for the last 20 odd years as the most noble Ponzi scheme in existence, we now have a surfeit of highly credentialed, highly educated, intelligent people, masters and PhDs and more, that have access to these tools in behavioral science. Because even if the field doesn't value these things specifically in academia, it has not diluted the power of the tools that we can use to get insights. The tools are still great. In fact, the tools are better than they've ever been before. And what's more, there's thousands of people now with these advanced degrees without jobs, but they've got these tools. And not only that, but we're not living in an era anymore where you need an entire like basement of a psychology building to run the computer necessary to run the statistics, right? Anyone who's got a laptop and a few $100s has access to more rigor, more information, more statistical and knowledge bearing tools than anyone before in any field of behavioral science. And so what we have is a bunch of people, highly educated, access to great tools, without jobs. And I think that last part is a hidden blessing. Because if you're one of those people who doesn't have work, but you have this education, you have you have this ability to gain perspective in that you don't need the academy to tell you what a good use of your time and your mind is. You have these tools. You don't need anyone's permission to use them. And in fact, the world needs you and those tools and the insights and expertise that they can generate, it needs those things more than ever. Because Milgram and Lewin were right. There's tons of academic research, theoretical research generated in labs. The deficit in our knowledge is work that's done in the real world. Lewin was right. When it comes to big questions, and if they need to be asked, look around. Like, I don't know about you. This is being recorded in July 2024. How many weeks of unprecedented events do we need to show us that there's plenty of big questions to be asked? In fact, for every person that doesn't have a real social science job, there's 100 questions waiting to be asked. And you don't need to be asking them under the auspices of a university or while you're trying to get tenure or at some technology firm where you're trying to work your way up the individual contributor chain. You can ask these questions without those things. You don't need permission to use your skills. Don't need permission to use these tools. And the biggest lever that you have that I guarantee you were not taught in graduate school, despite what's going on with the job market, despite what's going on with anything else, the biggest lever that you have, rhetorically, scientifically, intellectually, the biggest lever that you have is thinking about who you're doing the research for. And I guarantee you that the thing that you've probably overlooked up to this point is doing that research in service of others. If what I've said resonates with you, whether you're a social scientist or not, there's a link in the description. Follow it. And regardless of all of that, please remember that no matter what you've heard or what I've said, death comes for us all, and a closed mouth never gets fed. Look up, everyone. We'll talk again soon.